I've mentioned the triple conjunction. This is about the triple conjunctions, right? Of three planets, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. Right? So Mercury is the planet that rules communication and media. It's also the ruler of the sign of Virgo, which is frequently associated in mundane astrology with the people, the workers, the collective, right? Mars is the planet of war, conquest, aggression, right? Saturn is associated with things like enforcement of hierarchy, structure, authority, and time, right? So, these planets come together in a triple conjunction. And what do we get when we add all of these archetypes together? We get rebellions, uprisings, revolutions, wars of independence, and the brutal efforts to suppress them. Um, oh, hey, William Birkin. Hey, Hyped Up on Coffee, Zero Gold, Pony Soprano. Good to see all you guys here. I'll turn the chat back on. It doesn't matter if you can't. Well, it's going to cover up some of the presentation. I'll turn it back off. So basically, this is what we've got, right? These cycles correspond exactly to all this, and you guys are going to be blown away by how precisely they do. So here we go. The pattern. All right. So now these triple conjunctions do not recur in or according to any set pattern, right? So the conjunction of Saturn, Mars, and Mercury may recur rapidly within a 10-year window and then not occur for decades, right? You'll have conjunctions that occur every 2 to 4 years for like 10 years and then nothing for 30 years. And then you'll have one and then nothing for 20 years and then another series of conjunctions. And over the window of data that I analyzed, I was not able to discern any pattern about the regularity with which these triple conjunctions happened. But when they did occur, there was a very clear pattern to their effects. So what we do is we look for points where Mercury, Mars, and Saturn can join within 5 degrees of each other, and we look at the conditions at the time this occurs. Second, we look for the immediately following Mars square to the triple conjunction, right? So this will make more sense with the example coming, but basically, once the triple conjunction happens, we want to track Mars. Mars is the trigger planet. And so if the conjunction happens at 7 degrees of Aries, then when Mars gets to 7 degrees of Cancer, that's going to be the trigger point, right? Because that's the Mars square to the conjunction. Now, the other aspects that Mars makes to the conjunction degree and to Saturn matter in this cycle, but this first Mars square is usually the critical point. Now, going forward, we have our first example. So, the French Revolution. Okay, we have here a chart for March 19th, 1789. Okay, there is a triple conjunction of the planets Saturn, Mercury, and Mars, all here in Pisces. And it's occurring March 19th. Now, around this time, elections for the Estates General were being held, right? The elections were held at different times in different regions of France, and the whole process took a few months from January to April. This was the convening of the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. And it was the dissolution of this Estates General, which was basically like a governing body, that led to the French Revolution, right? And so if we see here that Mars is at 10 degrees of Pisces, right, then when we step forward and see Mars at 10 degrees of Gemini, we get the storming of the Bastille. So the Mars reaches 10 degrees of Gemini on July 17th. 3 days before that, we had the storming of the Bastille, which is widely considered, this is basically the start proper of the French Revolution. Yeah, the Bastille, if for those unfamiliar, was this prison that basically represented like the corruption of the nobility and the king and all of this, and they freed what the revolutionaries saw as political prisoners from the Bastille. So we see here that this takes place right exactly on because the triple conjunction, if we go back and see, Mars is at 10 degrees Pisces. When Mars gets to 10 degrees Gemini, which makes a square to Pisces, there is action. Now, what's also important is when Mars actually squares Saturn. But we'll get to that later. Also important is the opposition, right? So in 1790, when Mars opposed Saturn, basically this was the constitutional monarchy that was established in France. There was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which was kind of like the French version of the Bill of Rights. But this revolution would continue, and this, constitutional monarchy wouldn't last because, King Louis would eventually be chased off, right? So we go forward and want to see a little bit more nuance with this astrological pattern. So what makes the pattern worse or better, right? So what makes the pattern more intense, the more intense violence tends to occur when the triple conjunctions are under 5 degrees, and there's multiple triple conjunctions occurring within a short window of time, like 10 years. And then there's violence already ongoing at the time of the triple conjunction. If these conditions are present, then the violence is going to escalate. Now, what mitigates the intensity of the violence, right? The triple conjunction being more than 5 degrees, there's not tensions, but no outright violence at the time of the conjunction. Another thing is that it's an isolated triple conjunction where there's no others happening around it, right? So when you get one by itself, we'll see later, the violence is not it's not as good. So the second example we have for this is another triple conjunction. Here we see again Saturn, Mars, and Mercury here in Aries, right? This is the second in a series of conjunctions occurring in 1791, 1793, 1797, and 1801, right? So this period at the end of the 18th century had a cluster of these triple conjunctions, right? I hope that everyone is still following along. I'm not losing people by, oh, I wasn't seeing the new comments. Okay, cool. Yes, so we're gonna get into that about the degeneration of things, right? So as these conjunctions go on, the violence gets worse, right? And things escalate more and more, right? So this is the French Revolution is still going on. Basically, they'd signed this constitutional monarchy, but it was a hesitant agreement. So we've got this here in April happening. What happens next? Well, at the next Mars square, so we saw the last conjunction was around 9 or 10 degrees of Aries. Now, this is August. Now, this is before it happens. So we get a big massacre in the French Revolution. This is a little bit before the actual Mars square. But when we get to the actual Mars square, we get a very important development in the French Revolution, which is the Declaration of Pillnitz. So this basically was a joint resolution from the Roman Empire and Prussia in support of King Louis against the French Revolution. Now, this radicalized the revolutionary Frenchmen that had previously been participating in the constitutional monarchy and led to the Revolutionary Wars of 1792. So the Mars-Saturn square here in 1791 basically reignited everything and caused the French Revolution to further degenerate. And then it was these revolutionary wars that led to the terror and the rise of Napoleon and all of this, right? So we see here that these repeated conjunctions exacerbate the condition. Now, all right, we've got some questions here. So it says, Is there any relationship to the signs that the conjunctions are occurring in when they occur in close to a series of the 3x conjunctions? So we might get to that at the end. The thing is that the weird thing is that the Robin did a statistical thing of like all of the conjunctions for like thousands of years. I don't know. It was like from like it was like 6,000 years of data he ran, and he found that the vast majority of these occur in the signs of Aries and Pisces, right? And hardly any occur in any of the other signs. So that's a very interesting thing to me, right? Because Aries is the sign of the individual and Pisces is the sign of the collective. And it's something like 80% of these conjunctions occur within one of those two signs. So it's pretty interesting. So someone says, hey, everyone, hope I didn't miss too much. Just to catch everyone up, what we're looking at is we're looking at the cycle of the conjunction of three planets when Mercury, Mars, and Saturn all conjoin. So and then we can see the development of revolutions and uprisings, right? So just to go back on this, we get a triple conjunction here. Well, this is after the constitutional monarchy has been signed, right? So we get this triple conjunction around 11 degrees of Aries, right? All these planets are conjoined here. Then we go forward and the violence doesn't stop. It gets worse as Mars gets closer to squaring Saturn. And then by the time we get the Mars-Saturn square exact, we have this declaration from these foreign governments that radicalize the Frenchmen and lead to the Revolutionary Wars and the Terror, right? So we see how the progression of this synodic cycle of these three planets works. Now, someone else says, can you use statistics with the program to test these hypotheses? Yes, we're going to get to that. This is something I've just discovered. I haven't had time to do statistical analysis on it yet. So going forward, we're not going to stay live for 6 hours. We're not going to stay live for 6 hours. It's not going to do it. So, all right, moving on. There was a few other things that happened during this Mars-Saturn square that were very interesting. So one of the things that happened was the Haitian Revolution. This happened, so the exact Mars-Saturn square is August 23. The Haitian Revolution started 2 days before that, on 21 August 1791. The revolution was the largest slave uprising since Spartacus's unsuccessful revolt against the Roman Empire nearly 1,900 years earlier. And this revolution was successful and actually led to the founding of a state free from slavery. I mean, I don't know, this example to me is incredible, right? Like we go back and we see the Mars-Saturn conjunction here in Aries, Mars-Saturn Mercury conjunction here in Aries. And then when that square happens, we get the Haitian Revolution. I mean, Rob, what do you think about that? I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah. So I guess, and since you pointed out most of them are happening in Aries, so that means that when Mars hits that square, it's going to be fallen in Cancer.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing to point out. Yeah, it's Mars is this exacerbating point is when Mars is not in a good position. So let's go forward. All right. So next example. All right. So we've been looking at the French Revolution, which was a successful revolution because there was a series of these triple conjunctions that occurred within a compressed period of time. And this gave the revolutionaries enough fuel. Right now, let's look at another one. So this is an uprising in China against the communists. Right now, the previous triple conjunction of Mars, Saturn, and Mercury occurred in 1899. Right, And the next triple conjunction of Mars, Saturn, and Mercury after this occurs in 1962. So this is an isolated triple conjunction. There's no others around it to help. Now, there was an uprising that began on December 11th, about a week before this triple conjunction, right? And what do we see happen with it? Well, the uprising was brutally suppressed. And by April, the ruling power had near complete victory, right? So we see here that when there's not more follow-up triple conjunctions, the rebellions fail. Now, interestingly enough, around the time of this Mars-Saturn square, there was an assassination attempt on Mussolini, and the gangs bombed the Republican primary in Chicago. It's called the Pineapple Primary. They had bombs, hand grenades shaped like pineapples that they threw into the Republican primary. Crazy history. Go and look it up. It's fascinating. Now, so we see here, this example, the rebels were not successful. Now, here's another example of an unsuccessful rebellion. This one occurred during the 1966 conjunctions because it was also isolated. The previous conjunction was back in 1927, and the next one's not going to occur for a while. And so, the triple conjunction occurred here in Pisces, and then by the time we get to the Mars-Saturn square, it's July, right? So we have February to July as the time frame. And the uprising lasted from March 26th to June 8th. So within that time frame, the uprising comes and gets demolished. So this person asks, when you say subsequent conjunctions, do you mean just a Mercury and Mars, or do you mean a triple conjunction again? I mean triple conjunction again. So when I'm talking about the subsequent conjunctions, I'm talking about how they will recur every few years. Here, when we get to the next slide, it will be more clear. So this makes it more clear. The example for Indonesia in the 1990s. There was a series of triple conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn on these dates: March 24th, 1994, March 23rd, 1996, and March 31st, 1998, right? Mercury, Mars, and Saturn all conjoined on these dates, right? Now, when we look at the waxing Mars square, so once Mars squares the position of that initial conjunction that took place on these dates, we have these date ranges. So in July 1994, we get the first protests against the Indonesian government, right? Then July 24th to August 5th, this is when the widespread riots happened that made international news. And then by the time the last square is happening, the regime has fallen, and we are in the Reformation era, where they're trying to establish, a democratic system, and they're taking action against war criminals and things like this. Now, someone asks, how would one zero in on specific locations affected? Astrocartography, eclipse lines. Very good question. I have not solved that yet, but it's something I want to look at.
Well, the application has that capability. We can explain it later.
Yeah. I'm going to keep going. So another example that we've got is the fall of the Spanish Empire. This is another series of triple conjunctions. So the Spanish Empire had, a series, it still had some colonies, Cuba and the Philippines mainly. These series of triple conjunctions of Mars, Saturn, and Mercury occurred here with 2-year gaps in between them in 1895, 1897, and 1899. Now, the events aligned with this cycle include the Cuban War of Independence, right? The interesting thing about this is that the Mars squares and oppositions in this cycle correspond precisely with the intensification of General Weyler's reconcentration policy, which was arguably the world's first concentration camps. And the killing of the genocide peaked during the Mars retrograde, right? So it's an interesting thing to point out with Cuba. Now, by the time we get to the triple conjunction in 1897, after that, the United States intervenes on behalf of Cuba against the Spanish, and we get the Spanish-American War. Roughly contemporaneously to this, we have the Philippine Revolution against the Spaniards, and then the Philippine-American War, right? And so, these events are all associated with successful uprisings and wars of independence against the Spanish. So we see this pattern playing out over large periods of time. Now, that brings us to what's happening now. We have these triple conjunctions in our time. We have ones occurring April 20th, 2026. That's coming up. The next one after that is June 2nd, 2032. After that, it's July 22nd, 2036. So these are gaps of 4 to 6 years. Now, so far, we've only examined two types, right? We've examined when the triple conjunctions come in clusters, where they're 2 to 4 years apart, like they did in the 1990s, and like they did at the end of the 1800s, and like they did at the end of the 1700s, right? Now, and then we've looked at the isolated triple conjunctions, right? But this is a third type. This involves gaps of 4 to 6 years. So in the time period that I examined, there was one period of time that roughly seemed to correspond to the same amount of gaps in between the triple conjunctions. And that was the 1820s and the 1830s. All right, so here we have the dates. These dates over here are the dates where we had triple conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. So we get a triple conjunction here on May 4th, 1821. By this point, the Greek War of Independence had already broken out, right? This War of Independence ended up being successful, but not until 1829. So it was hard fought, right? Then we had Belgian Revolution, right? This began at the Saturn-Mars opposition, and it was successful. We had the July Revolution, which is also referred to as the Second French Revolution, right? This, it also occurred as the Glorious 3 Days, right? This was a very fast revolution. This occurred in July 1830 at the Mars-Saturn opposition. It was successful. We had Nat Turner's Slave Rebellion, right, which occurred in August 1931, just as the triple conjunction was happening, and it was suppressed, right? Then someone says, wasn't the Civil War during this time, though? No, the Civil War was in the 1860s. However, there were triple conjunctions of Mars, Mercury, and Saturn happening during the Civil War. I just didn't cover them on this presentation. The Civil War period is very strange. It doesn't follow any of the other patterns. It's a fourth thing that I haven't even gotten into. That period, it works, but the gaps between them is weird, right? So basically, we also get the Second Seminole War, which is like the longest war that the United States fought against the native population here. So overall, this period gives mixed results between the rebels versus the hegemony, but it's set up for the age of nationalism in the second half of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. Everyone is reacting, fuck, LMAO, I know. But actually, I'm not going to be totally doomer here, although it does get worse. So just wait. All right, so this is what we've got coming up for the next triple conjunction, right? April 20th, 2026. Now, I've got here on the left that Effective April 20th, 2026, the U.S. Army is increasing the maximum enlistment age from 34 to 42 and eliminating waiver requirements for a single possession of marijuana. So basically, this is going to make it easier to join the military, right? So this has already been announced, right? And this is on the day of the next triple conjunction. Now, what happens next? Well, August 24th, we get the Mars square. So we see that the triple conjunction is here at 8 Aries. Now, when Mars reaches 8 Cancer, this is a Muslim holiday, all right, where they celebrate the birth of Muhammad. Now, in recent years, the Palestinians have celebrated this and the Israelis have attacked them, right? There's also a lunar eclipse following this 5 days later.
It's in an eclipse window on August 12th is the first solar eclipse.
So yes, there was this is within the 2 eclipses. Yeah, that's important to point out, Rob, is that there was a solar eclipse before this, and there's going to be a lunar eclipse in a few days. And so the fact that this Mars square happens to fall on this is not good.
Sorry, I laugh when I'm scared.
Yeah. People are commenting in the chat. I'm going to keep pressing on for now. So this is not good, obviously. The fact that this is all aligning like this makes the end of August seem pretty bad to me. Now, what is this doing in the USA Sibley chart, right? Well, here we see it is activating the Saturn square sun in the USA Sibley chart, right? So we've got the natal Saturn here in Libra being opposed by the transit Saturn. All right, this is T, and then this Mars is activating this T square here. So this is the USA chart, not Iran. Hyped up on coffee. Yeah, this is the USA chart. I'm also talking about what's happening. So I suggested there could be something going on in Israel. Now I'm suggesting there could be something going on in America. Now these 2 threads are going to combine here soon. You'll see where I'm going, right? Other things that were astrologically significant is that in Lahiri Mahadashas, the United States Sibley chart is in a Rahu Venus Mahadasha, which is the same Mahadasha as it was when the Constitution took effect. Venus is in the 8th whole sign house. Rahu and Mars afflict Venus because it's a malefic hemming. So Rahu is here in Leo, Venus is here in Cancer, Mars is here in Gemini. So it's a malefic enclosure of Venus here. So all of this Cancer stuff is afflicted by Mars and Rahu. So I'm saying, is the United States getting a divorce, new government, new constitution? Because what if there's something like, the Israeli atrocities escalate so much that there's some kind of revolt here at home? Now, people that are old enough might remember in the 1960s with President Nixon and the Vietnam War, there were these protests out in front of the White House, and people were concerned that the protesters might storm the White House lawn, and they might have to shoot all these protesters trying to storm the White House. What if there's something similar happens? What if something like that actually does happen, right? What if there is some kind of protest where Trump, massacres people, right? Could this be the start of the Civil War? Because I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that, this may escalate things in the Middle East, but then what is that going to do back here at home? So to follow up on this speculation, I've got some further speculation, right? So if the aftermath of the 1820s and the 1830s set up the rise of nationalism, perhaps the aftermath of this period will be the rise of transnational governments, New World Order. right? Here are the international conferences and meetings that are taking place during this triple conjunction. We have the 2026 ECOSOC Forum for Financing on Development, right? So this is where they talk about how the World Bank and other global financial institutions are going to work with developing countries in order to finance them and develop them, right? There's the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, right? You know, the World Bank and other things have been making these deals with indigenous groups where the indigenous groups basically retain rights to live on the land but sell the carbon out of the land so that some transnational corporation can mine it, strip mine it. We have the International Law, American Society of International Law annual meeting happening, the US Commission on Population and Development, the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Review Conference is happening, and the first international conference for the phase out of fossil fuels, right? So this is not great that this is scheduled to happen on
I don't
this.
think that that non-proliferation nuclear weapons conference. My opinion is that by the time that happens, April 27th, we
We'll
will.
see. Yeah,
I
we'll
don't
see
know.
what
I don't know
happens.
if
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So
because
the thing
yeah, I'll
is
tell you
that it
later.
meets it's supposed to meet every 5 years. This non-proliferation weapons meeting is supposed to meet every 5 years, supposedly, right? So that's what I've read. Now, here's the conclusion that I have. Our current situation is basically middle difficulty, right? So we've seen that the isolated triple conjunctions of Mercury, Saturn, and Mars are bad for the rebelling subjects and good for the rulers. The triple conjunctions that occur rapidly, like every 2 to 4 years, are good for the rebelling subjects and bad for the rulers. When the triple conjunctions are spaced out in 4 to 6 year gaps, they give mixed results. And this is our current situation. Now, the one that's going to happen is very tight, and violence is already ongoing in many parts of the world. So we can expect these wars to escalate over the summer in between the triple conjunction and the Mars square. So basically, what I'm saying here is that in between April 20th and the end of August, the conflict globally is going to get a lot worse, and it's going to reach a crescendo at the end of August. And then the Mars retrograde that winter is going to pick it back up again, right? That's my prediction. So it's going to be very important to watch if there are major protests or riots that occur around the triple conjunction or if they occur closer to the Mars square, right? The successful rebellions and revolutions tend to take place during the Mars square or opposition following the triple conjunction, right? The ones that are suppressed tend to take place closer to the time of the triple conjunction. The one exception to this that I found was the Greek War of Independence, but this was a special case because it had another triple conjunction following it 6 years later. There was a triple conjunction of Mars, Mercury, and Saturn in 1821, and then another one in 1827. And then this war did not resolve until Mars went through its full 2 year synodic cycle and made its full set of aspects to that conjunction in 1829. So basically, if it's going to be worse if there's action in April, better if there's action in August. William Birkin
And
says, all this
so,
Mars revolution talks makes me think of the symbolism of the Lamb in Revelations. Yeah.
well, I mean, that's the thing that you like. So you mentioned that the Mars square happens during a very holy date for Islam.
Yes.
The triple conjunction happens during Passover, right?
Oh, right. Oh, shit. Yeah, I didn't even realize that. Yeah, because the triple conjunction is here. Yes, it
Passover, I think,
is.
happens on the 15th.
Right.
Of
So it's
April.
near, it's during Passover. Okay. So going forward just a little bit more, I do have a few things to look at, a few charts. Now, this is going forward to the Mars opposition. So I talked about the Mars square, right? Here at this year. Now I want to talk a little bit about next year because there's going to be a Mars retrograde in Virgo and Leo. And then finally, next summer in July, we're going to get Mars getting to 8 degrees Libra, which is opposite the 8 degrees of Aries where the triple conjunction occurred. All right, so this is here. This is the end of July 2027. Now, we see here in this chart, it's Mars conjunct Saturn, right? But it doesn't, Uranus return, right? We look here at the full moon. The full moon is roughly conjunct the moon of the United States Sibley chart, right? And I was looking at this and I was like, this doesn't seem like it's telling me what I like. It seems like there's something else I should look at. And so I looked instead at the date of the Constitution. All right, so this is when the Constitution was signed, right? The inner chart here. And then this is the outer chart, the transits. So we see that that full moon is happening on the Saturn of the Constitution. This Mars square is happening on the Neptune of the Constitution, right? If we go forward to the new moon that takes place after this eclipse, we see here that there is a new moon with Venus and Jupiter conjunct all of this stuff in Virgo. And this is right during the Mars Saturn opposition. Right? And so Mercury is conjunct the sun of the Constitution. I feel like if there's going to be a constitutional convention, if there's going to be some kind of coup d'etat or some kind of changeover in the government, right? Where the United States, there's like if everyone's saying how Trump is going to try to maintain power, things like that, this is the time period to watch for that. This is the time period to watch for them trying to call a constitutional convention and rip up the Constitution and start from scratch, because that's what happens when you call a constitutional convention. You know, if 2/3 of the states call it, then it's going to happen. Or it could be that they simply suspend the Constitution and say, all right, now there's a different government. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, it's not good. So that's what I've got for this presentation. It's kind of a downer. It's kind of a doomer take, but this is the critical point I see coming up.